voices in the static. They whispered through the radio too soft to understand, but I felt them watching me. My name's Elias, and I took a night job at a radio tower in Blackwater Swamp, Louisiana, thinking it'd be my way out of a bad year. The pay was too good to pass up, but they gave me rules. Strange, specific rules I had to follow to make it through to the shift. That first night, I learned the swamp wasn't empty, and the tower wasn't just broadcasting signals. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, give this a like, and drop a comment to let me know you're with me. This story's a wild one, and I'm going to need the support to tell it. Blackwater Swamp was a forgotten corner of Louisiana, miles from the nearest town. Cypress trees draped in moss loomed over murky water, and the air was thick with decay. Locals avoided it, saying the swamp ate people, hikers, fishermen, even kids who wandered too far. I'd ended up there after a scam wiped out my savings. I was 32, living in a rented trailer, and the bank was breathing down my neck. My sister, Lena, kept saying I should move in with her, but I was too stubborn. When I saw the ad for a night technician at Echelon Communications, $30 an hour, no experience needed, I applied without thinking. They called me the next day, and I started that Monday. The tower stood on a patch of dry land in the swamp, reachable only by a narrow causeway. It was a rusted skeleton, 200 feet tall with a red light blinking at the top. The compound was small, a chain-link fence, a shed, and a concrete control room with a radio console. The causeway was barely wide enough for my truck, and the swamp pressed close, water lapping at the edges. My interview was a video call with a woman named Ms. Carver, her voice sharp, asking if I could work alone and follow instructions. I said yes, signed a contract I barely read, and drove out for my first shift 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The day technician, Amos, met me at the gate. He was wiry, maybe 50, with a face like he'd seen too much. He gave me a key, a flashlight, and a folded paper labeled Night Shift Protocols. His eyes were hard as he said, "Read these. Follow them. Don't ask me nothing." He climbed into his truck and sped off, leaving me in the fog. I stood there, the swamp's silence heavy. Frogs croaked, but it felt wrong, like they were warning each other. The tower loomed, its red light pulsing. I unlocked the gate and walked to the control room, the air thick with rot and ozone. The control room was cramped. A console with dials, a radio, a monitor showing the tower's signal strength, and a window with blinds. A red cloth sat on a shelf, and a locked cabinet was bolted to the wall. The protocols were taped above the console. I unfolded the paper and read them, my skin crawling. Never leave the tower compound between midnight and 5 a.m., no matter what you heard outside. If the radio emitted a voice speaking your name, switch to channel 13 immediately and do not respond. At 3 a.m., lock the control room door and recite the provided code phrase exactly, no matter what knocked. Do not look directly at the fog if it formed faces, even if they seemed familiar. If the tower's red light blinked 3 times in succession, shut off the main transmitter for exactly 17 seconds. If you found an object in the control room that wasn't there before, cover it with the provided cloth and do not touch it. The code phrase was written below. The signal holds. The night obeys. I laughed, nervous. "This some kind of joke?" I said to the empty room. The console hummed and the monitor showed a steady signal. My job was to monitor the broadcast, check the tower's cables every 2 hours, and log any issues. Ms. Carver's email mentioned interference but didn't explain. I started my first check at 10:30 p.m. The compound gate creaked, and the swamp air was damp, clinging to my skin. The tower's cables were secure, but the red light seemed to pulse faster. I heard a splash of the water, too big for a fish. My flashlight caught nothing but fog and trees. I hurried back, logging 10:30 p.m., cables secure. The monitor flickered and the radio hissed like someone breathing. I turned it down, my hands unsteady. Midnight came and the swamp changed. The air grew colder, the fog thicker, and the frogs went silent. I remembered the rule about not leaving the compound and stayed put. At 12:30, I checked the cables again. The fog was so dense I could barely see the tower. I heard whispers, not words, just a hum, like voices underwater. I checked the cables, humming to calm my nerves, and rushed back. The radio was on, hissing static. I hadn't touched it. I switched it to channel 13, my heart pounding, and the static faded. Back in the control room, I watched the monitor. The signal spiked, then dropped. The red light outside was steady, but the fog seemed to swirl, forming shapes I didn't dare look at. At 2:45 a.m., I prepared for the 3 a.m. rule. I locked the door, checked the blinds, and held the code phrase. At 3 o'clock, I said, "The signal holds, the night obeys." Knocking started. Soft, then louder, moving from the door to the window. Something scratched the glass, slow and deliberate. The rule said to stay put, so I did, repeating the phrase, my voice shaking. At 3:03, a voice came through the door, soft and familiar. "Elias, open the door." It sounded like Lena, my sister, but she was 200 miles away. My stomach twisted. I kept reciting, hands over my ears. The knocking stopped at 3:14 and the silence was worse. I waited until 3:15, then unlocked the door, my flashlight trembling. The shift dragged. The whispers returned on every check, and the fog pressed against the windows. The radio stayed quiet and I avoided the fog shapes. At 5:50 a.m., the fog lifted and the swamp seemed normal. Amos arrived at 6 o'clock, took the key and said, "You followed the protocols, right?" "Yeah," I said, my voice weak. He nodded like he knew I was shaken and left. I got home, but sleep wouldn't come. The whispers, the voice, they were real. I had to go back, and I was already dreading it. Stay tuned for the next part. It got weirder from there, the whispers in the fog. They weren't just sounds, they were voices calling me, knowing things they shouldn't. I was back for my second shift, Tuesday night, 10 p.m., sitting in the control room with my nerves frayed. That first night had rattled me and I hadn't slept right since. But I returned, and the swamp showed me it was only getting started. I sat at the console staring at the monitor's signal feed. The tower's red light blinked outside, steady but wrong, like it was watching. The control room was colder, the air thick with rot and ozone. The red cloth on the shelf seemed heavier, like it was waiting. My phone had no signal, the console phone hissed static, and I was alone. I started my first check at 10:30 p.m. The compound gate creaked, and the swamp was a wall of fog. The tower loomed, its cables humming louder than last night. The whispers were there, sharper, forming words I couldn't catch. I checked the cables, my flashlight shaking, and heard a low hum, like the tower itself was singing. I hurried back, logging 10:30 p.m., cable secure, myoe, but my hands trembled. In the control room, the monitor spiked, the signal jumping erratically. The radio crackled and a voice said, "Elias." My name, clear and cold. I remembered the rule and switched to channel 13, the voice cutting off. My heart pounded. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, but the silence mocked me. The fog outside was thicker, swirling against the window, and I avoided looking at it, thinking of the rule about faces. Midnight hit and the swamp grew hostile. The air froze, the red light pulsed faster, and the whispers became a chorus. On my 12:30 check, I found a cable loose, like something had tugged it. I tightened it, but the fog moved, forming shapes, arms, eyes, mouths. I looked away, humming, and ran back. The radio was on again, hissing. I switched to channel 13, my breath ragged. I needed answers. I pried open the locked cabinet, finding old journals. Most were technical logs, but one from 1995 was different. The handwriting was frantic, signed by a technician named Clara. She wrote, "The signal isn't ours. It's theirs. Don't listen to it. The first rule is the key." The page was stained like it had been wet. My stomach churned. What was broadcasting? I noticed a carving on the console, a triangle with a wavy line, like a warped signal wave. It was precise, deliberate. I checked the monitor and my blood ran cold. The same symbol was etched into the tower's base, visible on the feed. It hadn't been there before. The whispers filled the control room, coming from the air itself. At 2:45 a.m., I locked the door for the 3 a.m. rule. The fog pressed against the window, forming faces. Lena, my mom, even me. I looked away, reciting, "The signal holds, the night obeys." Knocking started at 3 a.m., violent, like something was breaking in. The whispers screamed, "Elias, listen." The voice was a chorus inside my head. The door shook, the blinds rattled, and something clawed the glass. I kept reciting, counting seconds. At 3:14, the noises stopped, but the whispers lingered. I waited until 3:15, then unlocked the door, my flashlight flickering. The swamp was silent, but the air felt alive. On my 4:30 check, the tower vibrated, a low hum shaking the ground. The symbol was brighter, glowing faintly. The rules weren't just for safety, they were hiding something. The shift ended at 5:50 a.m., the fog lifting. Amos arrived at 6 o'clock, his eyes sharp. "Followed the protocols?" "Yeah," I said, hiding the journal. He nodded like he sensed the lie and left. I got home, Clara's words in my head. The signal was alive and the tower was its voice. I searched Echelon Communications online. Nothing. The swamp was hiding a truth I wasn't ready for, but I had to go back. Stay tuned for the next part. It only got darker. Faces in the fog. They weren't just shapes. They spoke, their mouths moving in sync, calling me to join them. I was back for my third shift, Wednesday night, 10 p.m., haunted by Clara's journal and that warped signal symbol. I'd told myself I could handle it, stick to the rules, keep my head down. But that night, I broke a rule and the swamp came alive. I sat in the control room, my hands unsteady at the console. The monitor showed the tower, its red light pulsing too fast. The air was colder, the rot and ozone smell sharper. The red cloth on the shelf seemed to shift, like it was breathing. My phone was dead, the console phone hissed, and I was alone. I started my first check at 10:30 p.m. The swamp was a sea of fog, the tower barely visible. The whispers were loud, chanting my name. I checked the cables, my flashlight catching eyes in the water, reflective. Wrong. I hurried back, logging 10:30 p.m., cable secure, but my heart raced. In the control room, the monitor spiked, the signal erratic. The fog outside formed faces, dozens pressing against the window. I looked away, but one looked like Lena, her eyes pleading. I stared, breaking the rule about not looking at the fog's faces. The air changed, like I'd invited something in. The whispers roared and the faces screamed. "Elias, you see us." I yanked the blinds shut, my hands shaking, but the voices were inside now. I screwed up, I gasped, sinking into the chair. The monitor showed the fog swirling, faces forming in the air itself. The tower's hum was louder, shaking the walls. It was 1:10 a.m., and I'd already broken a rule. I dug into the cabinet, finding a 2003 logbook. It listed technicians: James Holt, 1994, Marie Dunn, 1998, Robert Klein, 2002. Each had a date and missing. The last entry, a month before my start, read, "They take you if you break the rules. The signal knows." My stomach dropped. Were they gone? Dead? I found a photo, faded, showing the tower at night, the symbol glowing. In the background was a shape, tall, blurred, with too many arms. I pocketed it, my hands trembling. The whispers were relentless, chanting in a language I didn't know. At 2:30, I checked the cables, humming to drown them out. The fog was alive, faces lunging at me. I found more symbols, carved into the tower, etched in the ground, painted on the shed. The swamp was angry, punishing me for breaking the rule. I made it back just before 2:45 a.m., locking the door for the 3 a.m. rule. At 3 o'clock, I recited, "The signal holds, the night obeys." The knock-on was immediate, splintering the door. The whispers screamed, "Elias, you're ours." The faces pressed against the window, clawing the glass. The tower's hum shook the floor and the monitor flickered, showing the shape from the photo closer now. I kept reciting, counting seconds. At 3:14, the noises stopped, but the whispers laughed. I waited until 3:15, then unlocked the door, my flashlight dead. The swamp was different. The fog was solid, the air electric. On my 4:30 check, I found a cable severed, sparking. The symbol on the tower was glowing, the whispers coming from it. "Join us!" I ran back, locking the door. The monitor showed the tower, the shape circling it, its arms stretching into the fog. The shift was a nightmare. The whispers never stopped, and the faces followed me, forming in every shadow. The radio stayed quiet, but the signal spiked constantly. At 5:50 a.m., the fog retreated, and the swamp calmed. Amos arrived at 6 o'clock, his eyes cold. "You followed the protocols, right?" "Yeah," I lied, my voice gone. I didn't tell him about the broken rule or the photo. He nodded like he knew and left. I got home, the photo and logbook haunting me. The whispers lingered, even in daylight. I researched Blackwater Swamp. Old stories mention missing workers at a broadcast site, but no details. The tower wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and I'd made it worse. I had to go back, but I was terrified of what I'd unleashed. Stay tuned for the next part. The darkness was only beginning, arms in the signal. They reached through the static, not just shadows, but a presence, hungry and endless. I was back for my 4th shift, Thursday night, 10 p.m., still reeling from breaking the rule about the fog. The journal, the photo, the missing technicians, they gnawed at me, but that night I learned what the signal really was. And I had to choose between survival and stopping it. I sat at the console, my hands trembling. The monitor showed the tower, its red light blinking erratically. The control room was freezing, the air thick with that stench. The red cloth was on the floor, like something had moved it. My phone was dead, the console phone silent, and I was alone. I started my first check at 10:30 p.m. The swamp was a void of fog, the tower's hum deafening. The whispers chanted, "Elias, join!" I checked the cables, my flashlight catching the shape from the photo standing in the water. It had too many arms, its head a blur. I ran back, logging 10:30 p.m., cables secure, but my hands shook. In the control room, the monitor flickered and the signal spiked. The radio crackled. "Elias, listen." I switched to channel 13, my heart racing. The fog outside was alive, faces forming, but I kept the blinds shut. The red light blinked 3 times. Fast, deliberate. I remembered the rule and shut off the transmitter for 17 seconds, counting aloud. When I turned it back on, the whispers screamed like I'd hurt them. Midnight hit and the swamp became a nightmare. The air was electric, the tower shaking, and the whispers chanted in a strange tongue. On my 12:30 check, I found a new object in the compound, a rusted key lying in the dirt. I remembered the rule, ran back and covered it with the cloth, my hands trembling. The key hummed under it like it was alive. I returned to the cabinet, finding a 1987 notebook by a technician named Thomas. He wrote, "The signal is a collective, bound to the tower. The rules contain it, but it feeds on breaches. Echelon knows they built it to broadcast them." My hands shook. A collective? Was that the shape? The faces? Thomas's last entry read, "I looked at the fog. It's coming." The notebook ended. I found a sketch of the signal symbol, labeled anchor mark. Thomas wrote it bound the collective, but breaking rules weakened it. My mistake had fed it. The monitor showed the tower, the symbol glowing, pulsing with the signal. At 2:45 a.m., I locked the door for the 3 a.m. rule. The fog was everywhere, faces clawing the walls. I recited, "The signal holds, the night obeys." The knock-on was relentless, the door buckling. The whispers screamed, "Elias, you're ours." The shape was on the monitor, its arms reaching through the screen. The tower's hum shook the room, and the signal spiked. I kept reciting, counting seconds. At 3:14, the noises stopped, but the whispers laughed. I waited until 3:15, then unlocked the door, my flashlight flickering. The swamp was a void. The fog was solid. The tower alive. On my 4:30 check, I found the key in the control room, uncovered, glowing. I covered it again, but the whispers came from it. "Join us." I faced a choice. Keep the signal running, follow the rules and survive, or disrupt it, destroy the symbol, and risk everything. Thomas's notebook hinted at shutting down the transmitter permanently, but it could unleash the collective fully. I grabbed a wrench, planning to smash the symbol, but the fog surged, faces blocking the door. I dropped the wrench, locked myself in, and waited out the shift. At 5:50 a.m., the fog retreated and the swamp calmed. Amos arrived at 6 o'clock, his eyes dead. "Followed the protocols?" "Yeah," I lied. "I didn't mention the notebook or my plan." He nodded, like he sensed it, and left. I got home, Thomas's words in my head. The collective was real and Echelon was complicit. I had to choose, follow the rules or fight. But fighting meant facing something I couldn't comprehend, and I wasn't sure I'd survive. Stay tuned for the next part. I was running out of time. Claws in the static. They tore through the signal, hunting me, and I knew I'd run out of chances. I was back for my 5th shift Friday night, 10 p.m., clutching Thomas's notebook. I'd learned the collective was bound to the signal, and my mistake had made it stronger. I'd almost fought back, but the fog stopped me. Now, it wasn't just watching, it was hunting, and I had to end it. I sat at the console, my hands steady. The monitor showed the tower, its red light erratic. The control room was a tomb, the air gone. The red cloth was shredded, the notebook open. My phone was dead, the console phone silent, and I was alone. I started my first check at 10:30 p.m. The swamp was a void. The tower's hum deafening. The whispers roared, "Elias! No escape!" I checked the cables, the shape circling the compound, its arms stretching. I ran back, logging. 10:30 p.m., cables secure, but it was a lie. In the control room, the monitor showed the shape, its arms in the signal. The fog was alive, faces everywhere. I brought a wrench, planning to destroy the symbol. Thomas's notebook said shutting down the transmitter and smashing the symbol could weaken the collective, but it might break the anchor entirely. I had to try. Midnight hit and the swamp was a battlefield. The tower shook, the air froze, and the whispers screamed. On my 12:30 check, I reached the tower, wrench raised. The fog surged, faces lunging, and the shape appeared, its arms wrapping around me. I swung the wrench, hitting the symbol, and the whispers shrieked. The shape recoiled, but the fog knocked me back. I ran to the control room, locking the door. "They won't let me," I gasped. The monitor showed the shape, arms pouring from the tower. The whispers chanted, "Elias, you're ours." I read Thomas's notebook again. He mentioned a ritual, redraw the symbol with salt to reinforce the anchor, but it required entering the signal's source, the transmitter's core. It was suicide, but the rules were failing. I had to act. At 2:30, I checked the cables, wrench in hand. The fog was everywhere, faces clawing. I found the transmitter's hatch, the symbol glowing. I drew it with salt, my hands shaking. The whispers faltered, the shape recoiled, but only for a moment. It surged and I ran, locking myself in just before 2:45 a.m. At 3 a.m., as I recited, "The signal holds, the night obeys." The attack was relentless. Claws tore the door, the walls, the ceiling. The whispers screamed, "Elias, you can't stop us." The shape was in the room, its arms inches from me. I kept reciting, counting seconds. At 3:14, the attack stopped, but the shape lingered, watching. I waited until 3:15, then unlocked the door, my flashlight dead. The swamp was a void. The air was gone, the fog solid. On my 4:30 check, I redrew the symbol on every cable, the shape fighting me. The radio crackled, but I switched to channel 13. The fog formed faces, but I look away. At 5:50 a.m., the fog retreated, the shape weaker, but not gone. Amos arrived at 6 o'clock, his eyes empty. "Followed the protocols?" "No," I said, too tired to lie. He stared, then drove off. I got home, the notebook my only hope. The collective was bound, but not for long. I had one shift left and I had to end it, no matter the cost. Stay tuned for the next part. It was my last chance. Light in the static. It flickered, faint but there, and I clung to it like salvation. I was back for my final shift, Saturday night, 10 p.m., when, with Thomas's notebook and a plan to stop the collective. The shape had hunted me, the rules had failed, and I'd barely survived. That night, I faced the signal and nothing was the same after. I sat at the console, my hands steady. The monitor showed the tower, its red light dead. The control room was silent, the air gone. The red cloth was ash, the notebook open to the ritual. My phone was dead, the console phone silent, and I was alone. I started my first check at 10:30 p.m. The swamp was a void, the tower silent. The fog was solid, faces everywhere. I checked the cables, logging. 10:30 p.m., cables secure. For the last time. In the control room, the monitor showed the shape, its arms in the signal. The fog was the swamp, alive and waiting. I prepared the ritual, redraw the symbol on every cable with salt, then enter the transmitter's core and seal it with a new anchor using Thomas's markings. It would trap the collective, but I might not return. Midnight hit, and the swamp was gone. The fog was everything, the tower floating in a void. I moved through the compound, drawing symbols, the shape watching. Its arms lunged, but the salt held it back. I reached the transmitter's hatch, its core a void of static. I stepped inside, notebook in hand, drawing the final symbol. The whispers screamed, "Elias! You can't—" I ignored them, completing the ritual. The void collapsed, the shape imploded, and light flooded in. I was back in the control room, the transmitter dead, the symbol dark. The air returned, the fog lifted, and the collective was gone. I stumbled through checks, the swamp silent. The radio was dead, the signal flat. At 5:50 a.m., the sky blazed and the tower was just metal. Amos didn't come. No one did. I left, notebook in hand, and never returned. I burned the photo, hid the notebook, and moved far from Blackwater Swamp. But the whispers followed, faint in my dreams. Echelon vanished, and the tower was abandoned. I'd stopped the signal, but I knew somewhere another tower was broadcasting. Stay tuned for more stories. The silence never lasts.